Hey, welcome to episode 110 of Awkwardly Awesome Podcast. Today, the guest I have, she's been on great adventures that completely and totally boggle my mind, and I can't wait to share her stories with you. So be back in just a moment. Be back in just a moment.
Today's guest, Jude Cote.
About Jude Cote. Jude and my mother, Mary Frances, have been wonderful friends since high school. Through my mom, I've heard about Jude's travel to exotic places. Jude believes in going on adventures. And I don't mean small adventures, I mean epic adventures. She travels to immerse herself in cultures and landscape. And I think sometimes just because she likes being really challenged by life and by circumstances. She believes in getting to know, understand, and become friends with people who call these amazing places home. So please help me welcome Jude Cote. Yay!
Hi, Jason. Great to see you. I'm happy to talk with you and your viewers today.
Thanks so much for coming on, Jude, and sharing these amazing stories.
My
Should we?
pleasure.
Thanks. Should we jump right into it?
Sounds good.
So when you were a kid, let's say 7 or 8, did you imagine that this would be your life? Going on these tremendous adventures?
Well, no, nobody could imagine this, but I think I got a good base of loving nature and adventure in my family because my dad was a fisherman and a hunter, and he used to take us out on vacations into these wilderness areas. So I think that set the tone.
What's an adventure you remember going on with your dad that really sticks out to you as exciting and meaningful?
Fishing the lakes in northern Minnesota. We'd catch northern pike and bring them home, cook them over the fire. It was a wonderful way to get to know nature. And also duck hunting. Dad used to take myself and my younger sister with him. So you're sitting there, listening to the ducks call. You're in wilderness areas, and it was wonderful.
And this isn't like the middle of the day, right? You would wake up really early in the morning.
Oh yeah, of course.
So then you found a career path, right? Right?
Yes, I worked in marketing and advertising for 20 years for some of the biggest companies in the country. But every time I had a vacation, I would go out into wild places, scuba diving around the world, mountain climbing, river rafting, just, anything I could do to be out in nature and have more of an adventure type vacation.
So you've never really believed in tame vacations like going to Disneyland or
Oh, yeah, of course. I've done those things too. Yeah, of course. But, I think when it comes to adventure travel, I think certain people just have something in their nature, maybe driven by our genes, that just make you feel more alive when you're out in more unpredictable settings. Uh,
Mm.
it's, it sounds contradictory, but when you're closest to death, you feel most alive. Not everybody's wired that way, but I think I am in that category. Yeah.
Well, when so many people, myself included, at times like to feel really safe. Can
Right.
can you describe the how being in a dangerous situation
Well,
helps
like
you feel fully alive?
yeah, I've thought a lot about this, and I just think it's different people are wired differently. And, you know, I would say for the vast majority of people, you're wired such that going through your daily life, you feel alive. You can get in touch with that feeling. But there's a smaller group of people that
Mm,
actually living sort of a normal day-to-day life feels
mm,
dead.
mm,
And because of that, when you're pushing the boundaries,
mm.
whether it's canoeing with crocodiles, uh, sitting with an elephant within 30 feet of you, or, tracking man-eating lions and camping amongst them. That's when you feel fully alive and you feel an actual sense of joy and excitement. So that's what's sort of driven me to do these things.
So there's no reason to talk about these adventures in the abstract. Let's jump right into it and talk about your trans-African adventure. How long was it for again? 2 weeks? Three
Yeah,
weeks?
right. It was 7 months, and it was an overland trip. So as we crossed 18 countries, we were bush camping the whole way. So it isn't like we were in hotels or had any sense of protection. You're setting up a tent in the middle of the bush. Uh, yeah, 7 months, 15,000 miles. And
So please describe what bush camping is a little bit for those of us who haven't bush camped.
well, depending on the circumstance, for example, at the beginning of this trip, which started in northern Africa and went across Central Africa and then down the east coast of Africa, in the beginning, we were supposed to go through Algeria, which would cover the Sahara Desert. But we got notification when we were in Morocco that another group of tourists had been attacked by the local Tuareg tribe. These are nomadic people that live in the desert. And they'd all been stripped naked, and the Tuaregs had taken their vehicle and everything they owned. And they were left alone to walk out of the desert. Well, so we're faced with that on the one hand. And then the question arises, well, is there an alternative route? Well, the other route open to us was to go through the Western Sahara, which is just south of Morocco and goes to Mauritania. However, that is a ceasefire zone that is full of landmines. So which do you do? Risk the Tuaregs or risk the landmines? Well, our
Where's
guide and
the
his
Torex or where's the landmine?
yeah. So
Hmm.
our guide, in his wisdom, chose the landmines, which meant we had to travel in a convoy, single file. I don't know how they got the people in the first truck to volunteer to be there, but we traveled in single file, and the instructions were whenever you get off that truck, for example, setting up camp, you had to stay in the tracks. So you slept inside those tire tracks, you went to the bathroom in the tire tracks, you slept in the tire tracks, you never deviated. And occasionally, as the winds would blow, you could see some of the tops of these landmines uncovered.
Uh-huh.
So that's one aspect of tent camping. You might be sleeping in the middle of landmines. Um,
That's a very vivid aspect of tent camping.
but on the other hand, for example, in Mali, we spent some time with the Dogon people, who are quite famous. They moved to their locale in Mali at the base of an escarpment in sort of a deserty area, um, 1,000 years ago, because of the Arab slave trade, and they wanted to escape that. So I
Hmm.
have a picture here. It kind of
Oh, boy.
shows the escarpment and some of their dwellings at the base of it. Uh, there you go. And staying there,
So in the escarpment is a cliff?
yes, the cliff. And you can see it has some, places in it where they've cut out caves and they can put their dead in there. And then you can see the little village at the bottom, some of their mud type villages. Here's another quick picture of the Dogon people, and they're very famous for their masks and regalia when they perform their ceremonies.
Oh, shoot. Oh,
But
hold it up one more time.
okay, all right, happy to. They're
Wow.
sort of
Oh,
high on stilts, and they have masks on top that extend for many feet. And they do
so-
believe their ancestors came from a planet in our solar system, which until very recent years could not be observed by the human eye. So it does lead people to wonder about, aliens and how they
mm,
got here. But
mm.
as an aside, again, you asked me about what it's like to tent camp. We did spend,
So just one sec.
yeah.
Hey Joe and Lynn and Tim, thanks for being on. And Tim says, "Wow," and and he says, "That's amazing." And this is so amazing, Jude. I mean, you've experienced all this, but like I'm listening and just I'm so excited. It's like I'm talking to Indiana Jude right now.
Okay. Thanks, Jason. And thanks,
So,
Tim. Nice to see you there.
so, so, like with Tim camping for 7 months, like how will you do the basics? Like get water, get food.
Water was rationed, and you only got like a very small little cup of water each day. And you had to decide how to use your allocated water. You could either bathe or drink. And actually, the people that were most proficient at this obviously were the people from Australia. They could make that little bit of water do everything. For most of us, though, normal people, we had to make choices. I might only wash my clothes once a month because that water was so precious. I didn't want to waste it
Mm,
on washing clothes. You kind of got to the point where you dispensed with underwear because
mm.
that just was sort of unnecessary and an additional item of clothing you didn't want to waste water on. Um, yeah, the people from Australia, they could drink, bathe, and wash their clothes almost daily. It was like unbelievable. Um, that's why,
What did you learn about life from rationing water?
well, learn from life. It was an interesting process. I mean, we had these maybe 30 giant jerry cans that we would try to keep topped up with water. But when we did run low, of course, we had to kind of go into villages. And as a process, it was probably not very nice, but we were following our guide's lead on this because it's all new to us, but we would just sort of push ourselves to the front of the line. There might be like 30, 50 local villagers trying to get access to this water. And we would just sort of take the front of the line, fill up our stuff, and move on. Uh, Again, probably not very humanitarian, but that was how we handled water. Um, course, we had to treat it, for the whole trip. Otherwise, you'd get sick.
What else? Like, how do you give food?
We bought food in the local markets as we went. And sometimes it was interesting because the people wouldn't speak English. So sometimes we'd have to go through 2 or 3 people that spoke different languages. We'd have we would speak English to someone, they would know French or Arabic, and then the Arabic speaking person would also speak, another language. So it was like this chain of languages that you would go through. But yeah, we bought all our local food in the local markets. And interestingly, in Zaire, we spent a month going through Zaire. If you're caught selling human flesh in the market, that's considered a misdemeanor. That's like a parking infraction. So, with that in the back of your mind, you had to be a little careful about what you were purchasing. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you climb Kilimanjaro as part of this trip, or was it a different trip?
No, it was this trip. Yeah, Mount Kilimanjaro is the tallest mountain and the tallest volcano in Africa. It's almost 20,000 feet. It's a fascinating climb because it's one of the few places on the face of the earth where you can go through all the different climatic conditions instead of having to travel like from the North Pole to, the South Pole to do that. As you climb higher and higher on the mountain, you go from, the savanna, which is warm and grassy, and then you work up through cloud forests, and then you move up to high deserts, and then eventually you end up in the Arctic. I mean, it is completely freezing up there.
Hmm.
Now, you can climb it either on a technical climb or the climb I did, which takes 5 days. It's not technical. You don't need ropes or
Hmm.
crampons for this climb. But the high altitude is a killer. And it doesn't matter how fit you are, altitude can take you out, no, regardless of your fitness. So the way we climbed was one of the members of our group volunteered to ascend fairly quickly each day, and the rest of us would just climb very slowly, giving our bodies, optimum opportunity to slowly acclimate. And then the person that volunteered to go on faster ahead of us, because there were huts you could stay in overnight, he would be our person who would, grab a bunch of sleeping benches, reserve them for us, so we had a place to sleep that night. Statistically, of the people who try to climb Kilimanjaro, roughly about 60% are successful, but
Wow, I didn't know.
yeah, about 60%, but 70% do get altitude sickness, which gives you nausea, headaches, diarrhea, and it can take people out. Of the people who've died on the mountain, about half have died of altitude sickness, and the other half have died of trauma, either a fall or some sort of accident.
Did you get altitude sickness?
There's a pill you can take. It's called Diamox. And there
Hmm.
were 2 Americans on this Trans-African expedition. Both of us brought Diamox. The other people who were from Japan and Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the UK, they didn't. But anyway, the Americans, I guess, did a little research on this in advance, and it helped enormously. Basically, what Diamox does is when you sleep at night, it keeps your respiratory rate raised so that you're doing a better job of oxygenating your body. Yeah.
How many of you were in this group?
Well, the Trans-African expedition, it
Yeah.
was 20 people total, and people from all over the world. And within that group, we had one guide, one assistant guide who did a lot of the driving. The guide, by the way, his only job really was to get us across border crossings. He wasn't there to like try to make the group cohesive or, a pleasant experience, let's say. Um, yeah, he was there just to get us across borders, the assistant guide, and then a cook. So that was our crew. And then the rest of us, of course, had daily assignments, to just make the camp run. But I would admit it was a bit of a Lord of the Flies experience. I think it might be fair to say that the kind of people who sign up for something like this aren't your like typical average folks. They might be, I'm including myself in this category, they might be a little off center. So I would say their social skills, of relating to other people probably isn't high on the spectrum. So yeah, it leads to a lot of potential conflicts, scary stuff. I'll just give you an example. We had traveled for 5 months and we, arrived at the very first place. It was a safari lodge where we could actually have a meal in a restaurant. Well, this particular night, one member in our group happened to come down with malaria. And of course, malaria can, if you get cerebral malaria, kill you within hours. Well,
Hmm.
we're all kind of knowledgeable about this, especially our guide. But what did our friendly group do? Well, we didn't want to be sidetracked by his malaria. So our guide drove him away to our tented campsite, 5 miles away, dropped him off, and then came back to party. So, you're kind of with a group of people where you're like, I got to the point where I'd wake up each morning and I'd kind of make a prayer to God that I didn't get sick because I kind of knew I was totally on my own. I mean, nobody's really going to help you. Even being in a group, you're really on your own. It's survival of the fittest.
So,
Yeah.
let's backtrack a little bit. What were you doing in your life that you decided to go on the 7 month trip? Were you debating between going to New York City and going to
The opera.
to Paris and going on to Africa, or what happened?
Well, it's interesting, Jason. I went to college and got a degree in marketing, and I had a fabulous career. I mean, one of the best careers in the country, really. I can't complain at all.
Mm.
But I realized about 10 years into it that it just didn't align very well with my nature, to be sitting at a desk and going into meetings and all of that. So I set a goal to leave marketing and advertising by the age of 40. But when I turned 40, I was still doing my work and I couldn't kind of figure out a way to cut the cord.
Mm.
So the idea I came up with was to sign up for the longest expedition in the world I could find, sign up for it, and then that was going to force me to quit my job. So that's exactly what I did.
So I mean, I know you've been camping before and stuff like that, but what's the closest thing you had done to the 7 month expedition before you did it?
Well, I've done a lot of river rafting. I went down the Colorado River a couple times, once in small rafts that only had like 8 people in them. So instead of going over the waves, you actually push down on the bow to go underneath them and be totally encircled by them. I'd done mountain climbing. I had joined the Mazamas Club when I lived in Portland, Oregon, and they teach you mountain climbing. So I had that under my belt. I'd done scuba diving all around the world. So I had a lot of
Oh,
outdoor
I
experience.
guess the question is, what's the
What?
longest you be, camped at one time before you went on this?
Camping. Well, I guess I'd say maybe 2 to 3 weeks. Yeah.
Oh, so you had done. Oh, you knew what the camping life
Oh,
was
yes.
about.
Oh, yeah. I'd done camping in Minnesota. I'd canoed the Boundary Waters area, um,
Mm,
for weeks on end. And, you had to portage, you set up campsites. One of the islands we slept on, there were actually two hunters there because there was a black bear on the island that was causing trouble for people. And I remember that night, the bear came into our campsite, and thank goodness we'd put all our food high up in the trees. But in the morning, as we were pushing off from the island, we heard gunfire. So I think they probably got him. Yeah.
mm. Well,
So, other things on this Trans-African expedition, um, I also spent time with the Mabuti Pygmies in Zaire. Zaire is in very Central Africa, and it's a failed state. I mean, there's no infrastructure, there's no nothing. We had to bring enough food for the entire month with us because we couldn't count on buying anything there. The only food we
that's a lot of food.
that's a lot of food. But I do have to tell you, Jason, we were kind of in a starvation mode the entire trip. um, yeah, you're not eating a lot of food on the road. It's tightly rationed, and
How do you adjust to that as a person who's grown up in America? What's that like?
you know what happens? Something clicks over when you're in these kind of situations, Jason, where I don't know exactly if this is the right way to say it, but you somewhat lose touch with reality. It's sort of like incrementally each day, like the hardships sort of build up and accumulate.
Mm.
And you just so committed to finishing what you started that you just accept it and adapt. And, you have to figure out a way to be resilient. Um, yeah.
Do you have options during the 7 months of? Were there points where you could have said, enough's enough and gone home, or once you
Yes.
started?
Yeah, well, a little over halfway through the trip, we did have a layover in Kenya, in Nairobi. And actually, part of the group did leave at that point, and they intended to. But if you wanted to leave at that, that would be an escape route there. And believe me, on other trips, sometimes there are actual physical fights, and yes, people do leave the trip and get out. Um, it's very difficult physically. You're subject to diseases, malaria, tropical ulcers were a big issue. We had
What are those?
there were about 4 people in our group that got them, and what happens is you get like a cut, for example, just a small cut somewhere on your body. Well, that immediately gets infected, and they turn into ulcers that just every day get progressively worse, which means they get bigger and deeper into your body. Worst case, you get blood poisoning and you can die. But our daily routine was every at the end of each day, the 4 people that had these tropical ulcers, we would, gently take off the bandages and then try to treat them with a sort of an antibiotic, you know, uh, liquid. However, they would never improve. It was just a continually progressing, problem. And the only way you can cure it eventually is to leave the tropics. Um, our guide, 5 months in Nairobi, took one of these people to his personal doctor, and the doctor just lifted up the edge of one of these bandages and then just put it down and said, "Ooh, you better go home." And for a couple of years after that, she was a Canadian. Every time her mother had a cocktail party, she would bring her daughter out and show all the people her scars from her tropical ulcers. So, yeah, you've got tropical ulcers, you've got, animal attacks are always potential. Um, uh,
Did your group have any animal attacks?
we didn't have animal attacks, but the whole thing is when you're going, for example, if you're going to the bathroom and you're traveling in this truck, you can't step away from the truck to do your business. So the procedure is you go to the side of it and like men on one side, women on the other, and do your business. There was one instance where I did leave the side of the truck. I just walked over maybe 20 feet. There was like an ant hill there. So I went on the other side of it for some privacy. But when I came back to the truck, I and climbed on, the truck took off driving. And within 50 feet, there were 3 lionesses sleeping in the grass. So
Oh,
that's why you just don't leave the truck. So there's animals. Of course, there are attacks from local people. And the year after my trip, one of the people on this particular trip was killed. They were camping just outside the Serengeti. And we were attacked there also on our trip. Um, I that night was sleeping on the truck as one of the guards because the sides of the trucks are just canvas. I mean, it's completely unsecure. So we would rotate this duty, but I was sleeping on the truck that night to protect it from theft. And we were warned by the local people that we should definitely move into the Serengeti Park or we were going to be attacked. Well, our guide, with typical British stiff upper lip attitude, he's like, no, we're going to camp here. We're fine. Well, that night, around midnight, we did have a couple of the men in our party patrolling just so that we wouldn't all be asleep. We had a big fire going, and the men could sort of brandish our axe that we used to cut firewood and things, but it's all show. About midnight, I woke up and I shone my flashlight out into the surrounding bush. And the minute I did that, a huge rock came flying toward my head. And there happened to be like a metal upright on the truck, and it hit it. If it had hit me, I mean, I certainly would have had a concussion, if not worse. But in that same general locale, the following year, they were attacked, and there was a Canadian man who was shot in the ankle with a poison arrow, and they couldn't get him to a doctor in time, so he died.
oh,
Yeah.
oh.
I mean, when you do go on these trips, they do ask you to sign paperwork in advance, to ship your remains home. I mean, you know, things can happen. Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about the adventure and the challenge, the phenomenal challenge of this trip. What are some of the beautiful parts of Africa that just brought delight and wonder to you when you experienced them?
Well, I think two come to mind. One is when we first came out of the mountains and got our first view of the Serengeti Plains. It was breathtaking, um, with all the herds on it and just the expanse and the colors. It was beautiful.
Oh, really? You were able to see the herds
Mhm.
like you see? I've seen that in movies.
Yeah, yeah. Well, 1.5 million wildebeest migrate north and south each year, and then another 500,000 um, uh, zebras and
Mm,
and impalas. So that's 2 million animals that are migrating
mm.
to and fro across the Sahara and the Massa Mara each year.
Wow.
Yeah, that was amazing. And then the other most, I think, beautiful spot I've seen was in Zimbabwe in a park called Mana Pools, and the uh, the Zambezi River flows through it, and just the trees are amazing because they all look sort of like umbrella shaped, and the
Mm,
reason is all the for whatever reason, I can't explain this, the elephants choose when they eat the leaves out of the trees, they go up on their hind legs. So all the trees are browsed off from the height of an elephant reaching with his trunk and standing on its hind feet. It's I've never seen any other place like that.
Did you actually see elephants
Mhm. Oh yeah.
doing this?
Oh yeah. Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
My gosh.
Mhm.
How about what are a few beautiful things about the cultures in Africa that you experienced?
Well, culturally, I think spending time with the Dogon people, again in Mali, and one evening, a representative of the chief came into our tented campsite, and he volunteered that anyone who was interested could sleep on his roof. And for whatever reason, I was the only person who raised their hand. I said, "Yeah, I definitely want to do that."
For some reason, Jude, that doesn't surprise me. I'm
Yeah,
not sure
well,
why, but it
it
doesn't
sounded pretty
surprise me.
amazing to me to sleep out under the stars at the base of the escarpment. Yeah, that would be cool. So when I arrived at his hut, it's sort of a mud brick structure with a flat roof on top. And they pulled out one of these ladders that you see in like ethnographic auction sites. It's basically kind of a crooked tree trunk that they just sort of chop footsteps out of. I couldn't believe I'm climbing up a piece of, art that would be auctioned in New York or something. So I got up there and I'm just enjoying the sights, the stars in particular, and I hear these distant drums. And I climbed back down the ladder, and I had a guide down below. He was half pygmy, half Dogon. And we talked about it, and he said, "Hey, do you want to go? It's the adjoining village." And I said, "Yes." So we walked over there, and in the middle of the village, everyone was standing in a circle. There were men playing drums, and there were about 6 women in the middle of the circle, all dancing. And I just stood on the outer perimeter, just wanting to observe and not interfere in any way. And, eventually little children spotted me and they'd come up behind me and reach up and touch my hair, this strange blonde hair. Uh, but after a while, one of the dancing women, walked through the crowd, grabbed my forearm, and dragged me into the center with her. So I got to dance with these women under the stars, and it was an amazing experience. Um, Another one is with the Mbuti Pygmies in Zaire. These are a pygmy group that live along the Ipulu River. Um, we were able to hunt with them, which blew my mind. And as an aside, when we arrived at the Ipulu River, there's an Okapi capture center there. I don't know if people are familiar with the Okapi, but I can show you sort of a picture of them. They're this sort of antelope type deer that are striped. They're very rare. They only live here
Oh,
in the jungle.
wow.
But at the Okapi Capture Center, we pull up in our truck and we see the river. So people put their suits on and they start running down there. Well, the local stopped us and explained that just prior to our arrival, an American woman, she was about 27 years old, was down at the river bathing, and a croc grabbed one of her arms and pulled her in the water. I mean, underwater. She battled this croc for 20 minutes, which, I mean, this is just unheard of. Once a croc gets you in the water, you're just a goner. But she hung in there. She every time the croc would roll to try to tear her to bits and or take her under the water to drown her, she fought back, held her breath, and eventually a man also came along to try to help her. But when she got stood up in the river, the arm just came right off. And as a sidebar, she flew back to America, and NASA, of all places, was they built her an artificial arm. And the other amazing thing about this story is she got right back on a plane and went back to Zaire, went back to the Apulu River, and continued to work as a tutor for two of the daughters of a research couple that were in the area. So, yeah. And so leading up to the Mumbuti Pygmies, we spent several days with them and were able to accompany them on a hunt. Basically, what they do is they have a little ceremony before they start out, and they smoke some grass and give thanks to the animals of the jungle. Then the
Mhm.
men go off in one direction with a very long net that they've handmade. It's maybe 50 feet long, and they string
50 feet.
yeah,
Wow,
it's really long.
big.
They string it along the base of the trees. And then the women go in the other direction, and their job is to call and drive the animals into the net. And once again, they invited people in our group to accompany them. Again, for whatever reason, I was the only one that said yes. And it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life to be walking through the jungle with these women and trying to emulate their calls,
Mhm.
which were, I kind of embarrassed to even try to emulate it, but it was sort of like, whoop, 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 whoop. So you've got like, 30 women all doing these wild calls and driving the animals. In this instance, we drove a diker, which is a sort of deer, into the nets. So that night we were able to have a meal of diker, and afterwards they spent the evening dancing and singing and playing their instruments around the campfires. And I
Oh,
was fortunate enough to get recordings of it. So,
oh,
yeah,
oh, oh.
amazing experiences.
So what was it like at the end of 7 months? Like you did this amazing trip and all of these experiences. What was it like to come back?
It was a shock. Um, During the trip, I did get a telegram sent to me from my boss at AT&T, and he actually
Your
offered.
boss at AT&T sent you a telegram. I just like that. That's
Yeah,
a neat
he sent me a
story.
telegram at the hotel we were staying at, asking me to come back after the trip. And he paid me a bonus, and I don't know. I arrived home. I was sort of in shock, but I thought, well, okay, he wants me back, so I'll give it a shot. I
Mhm,
lasted like 6 months, and I
mhm,
I just realized there's absolutely no way I could work in a corporate environment again.
mm.
Uh, so I got back on a plane, flew back to Zimbabwe, and that's where I started an import export business. But my real agenda was going out in the jungle with top guides who would teach me how to track man eating lions and black rhinos, both to learn that skill and also for photography.
Oh, you took a lot of pictures, huh?
Yeah, I do have quite a few pictures. Yeah.
Wow. So, so
Yeah.
what was it like tracking a man-eating lion?
Tracking big game like that, it surprised me. I mean, I imagined it would be a very slow process where you're walking with your eyes, riveted at the ground at your feet, and you're, very carefully evaluating each paw print
Mhm.
and following along. But they taught me a totally different way to do it, which is basically you pick up the track, and generally the way you do that is you drive the dirt roads, and you're looking for lion tracks that have passed the road, that night. Once you find that, then you get on your feet and you begin to track. And the way you do it is you actually try to keep your momentum up. So you're moving at a fairly quick pace and you're not
Mm,
looking down. You're looking about 12
mm.
feet maybe in front of you. And you're actually trying to put yourself in the mind of the animal. Because lions will generally stick to the game trails, which is different than rhino. Rhino don't care about trails, they just go wherever they want to go. But you're kind of putting your mind in that animal's mindset and moving at a fairly quick pace to find them. And that's the general procedure. Uh,
So, and then once you find a man-eating lion, what do you do?
well, this is mind blowing. There are probably only a handful of guides on the whole continent that can do this with someone. Most guides drive you in a vehicle, or if they take you on foot, if they're approaching something like lions, they turn around and take you the other way. There are a couple guides, a few guides, who will actually take you close to them on foot and teach you a methodology to approach very close, like within 30 feet, 20 feet. And the way you do it, it's sort of a dance where you stand and face the lion. The lion knows you're there, they're watching. Uh, as long as the lion is looking at you, you don't move. But the lion will, at some point, turn its head and look away. And at that point, you take one step forward and stop. The lion, of course, will sense movement in its peripheral vision, so they'll immediately look back at you. But then eventually they'll look away again, at which point you take another step forward and stop. And this, they're continually evaluating your body language, and you're doing the same with them. You're looking for their tail. You don't want that to be twitching. You don't want them to, have their lips pulled back. You don't want their manes to start going erect. I mean, there are all kinds of signals that you're approaching too closely. So yeah, you're reading body language and you're just creeping forward over time, and you can get very, very close.
Oh, yeah, your goal wasn't to kill the
Oh
lions,
no,
but
no, no,
uh,
no.
okay,
No, I
just
I
to take pictures.
exactly. Yes. Yeah. Now, the areas,
Oh,
my favorite areas for tracking had two prides of man-eating lions. One of the prides killed
mm,
the nephew of Earl from Britain. And the
mm,
way that worked was this young man, I think he was about 20, was working in a safari camp, a tented camp. And everyone had turned in for the night. And a pride of about 15 lions came into the campsite, and they amazingly walked right past all the black crew who were sleeping outside on the ground just under blankets. They all paraded past those people. But I knew the guide who was brought in by national parks to try to find out what happened. And they did find a flashlight on the ground. So apparently the young man had left his tent, which you're never supposed to do after dark, ever. But he apparently did, to probably relieve himself, and ran into the lions. And two of the lions chased him back into the tent and dragged him out. The really additionally horrible thing about this was the guide had left his rifle at the campfire. So he was unable to intervene to drive off
mm,
the lions. So
mm,
everyone in that camp had to just stay in their tents and listen to this poor guy, being eaten
mm.
alive. Um,
Wow.
yeah, so those are the lions that I would, track and spent my
Mm.
days and nights with. Yeah.
So, so why you alluded a little to this at the beginning, but why push all sorts of boundaries by doing this amazing adventure travel?
I can't explain it. I attribute it to genes. There's,
Mm,
I know on my mother's side, we come from Vikings.
mm,
So uh, I have four brothers and sisters, and I would say all five of us, when we went to college, all moved away from home and went to the far corners of the United States. And a couple of us have always been adventure travelers. I have an older sister who is a federal judge in Manhattan, and she has been to Alaska 20 times at least,
dude.
hiking the Brooks Range and kayaking and camping among grizzlies. And then her other,
Camping among grizzlies.
oh, of
God.
course, yeah. Yeah, she's amazing. And the other
You're
big,
like, yeah, duh. Why not camp
yeah,
among grizzlies?
yeah, yeah. There's a grizzly bear on Admiralty Island in Alaska that is believed to be the largest bear on Earth since the last ice age. And it's believed to be a hybrid from the last ice age of a polar bear and a brown bear mating. When it's on its hind feet, 13 feet tall. And
What?
yeah, yeah, it's quite something. So yeah, yeah, she camps amongst the brown bears up there. Yeah.
Oh.
So to answer your question, I just think it comes down to individual people's natures. Some people are inclined to this kind of experience, and they're most happy and joyful when they're in
Mm.
those environments.
Oh, so interesting. One thing I wanted to ask you, you were telling me before the show that you were looking at the 18 countries you went to, and right now, what's the situation with
Well,
traveling in those countries?
right. I went to the US State Department website because they have travel advisories by country around the world. And of the 18 countries I went to in 1993, which is 30 years ago, um, the US State Department says that basically six of them, which is a third of that list, shouldn't be gone into at all.
Mm,
Uh, and another 50%, uh, you need to use extreme caution in. So that only
mm,
leaves like three countries that you would visit with normal cautionary provisions. And I think one of the meanings of all that is, if you're going to travel, you should probably not delay. These situations aren't going to get better with time. They'll only get worse. Now, if you want to go to Africa,
yeah.
the countries I'd recommend, I think there are kind of two major choices. Either you go to Kenya and Tanzania, which are, on the website. You should take additional precautions, but, you can go. Um, because that's where this, 2 million herd migrates
Mm,
north and south every year in the Serengeti and the Masai Mara. And you can also climb Mount Kilimanjaro. You can go to
mm,
Zanzibar. It's a great place to go. Mostly, though, you might be in situations where you're inside a van, and there might be a lot of vans in one area. Uh, so you're not going to have an experience of solitude. I mean, you're going to be with, millions,
mm,
even billions of people go to these two countries each year to see these animals.
mm,
But it is a one of a kind experience.
mm,
The other choice is, if you wanted something where you're more alone, I'd say to either go to Botswana or Zambia. Go to the Luangwa Valley in Zambia is absolutely amazing. Or go to Botswana to the Okavango Delta or Chobe. they're both mind blowing, and you won't be in amongst hundreds of other groups.
But you'll see a lot of animals.
Oh yeah,
So,
it's fantastic.
hmm,
If you go to the Zambia, uh, Botswana route, you could also go across the border to Zimbabwe and go to Victoria Falls, which is one of the greatest places on earth. The only, there are no roads in. You have to fly in, and you see the mist rising from the falls above the jungle. It's quite breathtaking. And
wow,
you can raft and canoe on the Zambezi River.
hmm,
You can ride elephants there. They do have some, African elephants. You can actually ride them bareback, which I did once, and it was amazing because you're feeling the power of this animal.
hmm,
Uh, yeah. So those are the two choices, and maybe you could do both because they're both radically different from each other, but both are mind blowing.
hmm. Well, this has been. I know as I talk to you, I'm getting more and more excited about just the possibilities of exploration and adventure. One question I ask all my guests, not just the epic world travelers, but all my guests, is I talk a lot about the power of doing our imperfect best. And what it means to me is we have a vision of what we want of life and what we want to create. And as we follow that vision, we'll run into obstacles and challenges and make mistakes. But instead of stopping and retreating from that vision, we learn from all of that and continue forward. What does doing your imperfect best mean to you, Jude Cote?
Well, I mean, I'm in line with what you've just said. I guess I would just remark that all of us go through life and are going to meet hardships. Um, I mean, one of my worst was there came a point where I felt I couldn't continue going to the places in Africa I love the most.
Hmm.
Uh, I'd run across a con man, and it got to the point where he was mm, he was colluding with some people to kill me,
Hmm.
and I actually had to be harbored by friends. And at
Hmm.
one point, one of my friends, gave me a 450 Magnum pistol to, protect myself, and he had a
Hmm.
rifle which he used. Uh, so feeling that sort of that era had ended in my life as far as
Hmm.
sub-Saharan Africa goes, that really was a serious blow to me.
Hmm.
And I actually ended up having to get some professional help to work through
Hmm.
it. I spent some time with a psychiatrist, and I was
Hmm.
probably suffering from some PTSD and various
Hmm.
issues. I think the point being, if you are faced with hardship and if you can't really resolve it yourself, reach out and get help. You know,
If you are faced with hardship and you really can't resolve it yourself, reach out and get
yeah,
help.
yeah,
That's very powerful.
yeah,
Very powerful.
yeah. Thank goodness there are really great people in this world, who
Mm,
have the
thank
skills to
goodness.
help.
Thank
Yeah.
goodness. Well, thanks so much for spending the last hour with me talking about these stories. I know we could spend another 5 or 10 hours talking about more and more stories, but the podcast is only an hour. But thank you so much, Jude.
It's been my pleasure, Jason. Thanks for the invitation.
You're welcome. You're very welcome. Talk to you later.
You bet.
Wow. Wow. If you saw Jude, if you were out and about and Jude lived in your town and you saw her in the grocery store, you wouldn't necessarily, or you wouldn't know at all the adventures she's been on. So just. I continue to be fascinated by how much the people around us have to share, how many stories, courageous moments, difficult moments. I just keep encouraging myself and encouraging you to ask the people around you questions about their lives. Get to know them and also be willing to share your stories and your adventures because we each go on a different journey in life and we can all learn from each other. So with that, thanks so much for tuning in. My guest next week is just she's so powerful, Kendra. And I'll wait till next week to say to pronounce her last name correctly, but she just is such an advocate for for making brilliance out of whatever we are getting given. She was born with a challenging physical circumstance, but she's made absolute brilliance out of that. Please tune in next week, and until then, have a great week. Remember, you are the best because you are the only you in the world. You are the best you. There. So thanks for being you and.